worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors, He parted the raging sea. Our God, He holds the victory. Yeah. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We'll shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We shout out your God who saves. We sing to the God who always makes a way. 'Cause He hung up on that cross, then He rose up from that grave. My God, still rolling stones away. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We shout out your praise. 'Cause your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We shout out your peace, bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name, still the sea to still, called rage in me. Oh, let your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, breathe, call these bones to live, call these lungs to sing once again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, 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 you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, 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 you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Yes, Jesus.
When you walk into the room, everything changes. consume, God. All we are, we give you permission. Our hearts are yours. We want you. We want you to come and consume, God. All we are, we give you permission. Our hearts are yours. We want you. We want you to come and consume, God. All we are, we give you permission. Our hearts are yours. We want you. We want you to come and consume, God. All we are, we give you permission. Our hearts are yours. We want you. We want you. 'Cause we love you and we'll never stop. Can't live without you, Jesus. We love you. We can't get enough. All this is for you, Jesus. We love you. We'll never stop. Can't live without you, Jesus. We love you. We can't get enough. All this is for you. I'll make room for you. Make room for you. Do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want to. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want to. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want to. Here is where I lay down every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down. Every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want to. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want to. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want to. I will make room for you. Do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want to. So shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. So
This morning we're going to go to the scriptures and we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 17. 1 Kings chapter 17. It's this series we've been in for some time now that I've called Famous Bible Verses, and I've been asking the Lord to show me different verses in the scriptures that we all know, that we're all aware of, and we've been going through them and seeing what they have to say to us. And this is a famous verse, 1 Kings 17, verse 16. 1 Kings 17, verse 16. Here's what the Bible says, and you're going to recognize, most of you, where this story comes from, or where this verse comes from. It says, the jar of flour was not spent. In other words, it wasn't used up. Neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. So again, most of you knew when I began reading that this is the story in the Bible of the flour and the oil that never ran out, no matter how much this widow in the story, and we'll talk about her, no matter how much of it she used. And the story actually goes back, and it begins with a famine in the land of Israel. There was no rain, the crops weren't growing, and it all began as a result of Elijah's own prophecy. And some of you remember the story, and we're going to stay in 1 Kings 17, where Elijah comes to King Ahab of Israel, and he stands before him in the court, and he says, because of the way that Israel has sinned, and the way you, specifically Ahab, you have sinned, the rains are going to stop. Let's go back to verse 1, I'll show it to you. 1 Kings 17 says, now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. And in a part of the world that is prone to drought, and people had suffered from lack of rain, you can only imagine that what Elijah said made him instantly unpopular. Goes without saying, right? And so immediately after Elijah makes this announcement, God sends him into the wilderness, far away from Ahab, into hiding basically, and says, so here's where I want you to go, and here's where you're going to stay. That's in verses 2 through 4. And the word of the Lord came to him. So this is right after he makes the announcement. Verse 3, depart from here and turn eastward, and hide yourself by the brook or the stream of water called Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have, now watch this, I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. You want to talk about a miracle? Birds bringing you your food every day. Only God can do that, right? And so he goes out there and he's living in the desert. And eventually, however, because of the drought, which came into being, that little brook of water dried up. And without water, you can't live. And so Elijah then needed to move again. Now, probably, I'm just surmising here, but knowing what I know about Elijah, that he was a man who liked to move and to get things done, he probably wanted to go right back to King Ahab, right? It's been some time, and he's already made this announcement of God's judgment. He probably wanted to go back to King Ahab with a further message from God. But instead, God says, no, that's not what you're going to do. I'm going to send you somewhere else, and where I'm sending you, you're going to do what you've been doing. You're going to wait. You're going to wait some more. That's in verse 8. So then the word of the Lord came to him, arise, verse 9, go to Zarephath, and that's a name of a town, which belongs to Sidon, and Sidon is the name of a region, like our states, right? It's an entire region, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there, and behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. Now, if you want to find Zarephath, you can't exactly travel there and find a thriving, prosperous town. It's not an inhabited city anymore, but archaeologists have been there, and they've excavated and dug up the ruins of Zarephath, and what they tell us is that it was a small town, and it was located in the country we know today as Lebanon. And so in Elijah's day, that meant it was just cross the northern border of Israel. He had to leave Israel's territory and go into a different land. And the reason this is important, the reason the geography is important, is because it tells us something about the situation that God was putting Elijah in. You see, so what did we just read in verse 9? That Zarephath was situated in a region called Sidon. And the reason that's important is because King Ahab, right, he's the king of Israel, his wife, whose name was Jezebel, she was from Sidon. You've all heard about Jezebel, right? Well, archaeologists, historians have confirmed what we already know from what the Bible teaches us, that in that time of history and in that part of the world, Sidon was famous for one thing, religiously speaking. It was this regional center for that part of the world of the worship of the god we know as Baal, or as they would have said it in that day, Baal. That was the name they used for him. And so Ahab, he's the king of Israel, giving you some history here. He marries this Sidonian princess. Her name is Jezebel, brings her to the land of Israel as his queen, and now she's in a position of power, a position of influence, and she begins to promote the worship of Baal in the land of Israel. And the sad thing is, her efforts to promote Baal worship were quite successful, because it's not long before the worship of Baal becomes more and more widespread across the land of Israel. She actually accumulated enough power that she began to persecute the prophets of the God of Israel. And I want to just show you just one verse. Let's go to chapter 18, the next chapter. Verse 4 tells something that somebody did to protect those prophets. 1 Kings 18:4 says, when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah, now he's somebody who works in the court of Ahab. He's a man who serves God, a righteous man. Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave, and he fed them with bread and water. That was bread and water that came from Ahab's supply. And so he's putting himself at risk to keep these prophets alive. Now, why am I getting into this? Because I want you to think about Elijah's situation. He's already unpopular. Why? Because he's the one who went to Ahab, king of Israel, and says, all right, the rains are coming to an end because of your sin. And again, drought was a very, very serious thing in that time of history. It's a bad thing here. We need rain here. But we don't suffer drought in the same way that they did. They didn't have access to the underground reservoirs we do. They couldn't make it through. And so when drought came and famine ensued, people literally starved to death. So he's very, very unpopular. And so that's part of the reason God had sent him off into the wilderness by the brook of Cherith and said, you're going to live here. This water is going to give you something to drink, and I'm going to send food by ravens for you to be fed. But now the source of water has run out, and he's got to move because, again, you need water to stay alive. Here's the problem. God says to him, I'm sending you to Zarephath, which is in Sidon. That's Jezebel's homeland. Meaning what? It is filled with people who worship Baal, right? Meaning they do not worship the God of Elijah. And furthermore, if you study history, they hated the God of Elijah. They hated the God of Israel. So already Elijah's kind of like in a tough situation. God's saying, I want you to go somewhere where they don't want you, and you're going to struggle and you're going to suffer if they find out who you are. And then God says, I'm going to make it even more difficult. Let's go back and reread verse 9. God says, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Now watch this. I'm going to underline one word. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. Now, why would that make Elijah's life more difficult? Because in that time of history, and in that part of the world, most widows were poor. Women didn't have access to income as they do in our society. Not that it's easy for women now, I'm not saying that, but it was harder back then. A woman couldn't just go out and get a job. And especially if she was a widow with no husband to support her and no grown son to support her, her options were very limited, typically begging, or, I hate to say it, but it was true, prostitution. That was the choice they had. And so God is saying, I'm going to send you to someone who has very little herself. That's what Elijah's probably thinking. And I know I'm repeating myself, but I really want to drive this home this morning. I want you to think about this. God is sending Elijah into a hostile land. It's filled with people who hate what he stands for. And now God is saying, I'm gonna use someone to provide for you who has no way to provide for you. And then God adds another detail. You're going to go into this tough situation, and you're going to be stuck there. Look at the first part of verse 9 again. Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and what? Dwell there. I like the way the NIV, the New International Version, translate that little phrase. It says, stay there. You're not coming home, Elijah. You're going to be there a while. At some point in our lives as followers of Jesus, all of us are going to come to a similar type of spiritual test. And you're going to have to ask yourself and answer a question, which is this: am I willing to obey God even when it doesn't make sense? Somehow Elijah makes it through hostile territory. He's into the land of Sidon, and he arrives at Zarephath. And when he gets there, the situation is exactly as he probably expected. He met the widow, and he asked her for some food and water, and listen to her response, verse 12. She said, now he's just asked for a little meal, right? As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. In other words, enough maybe to make a little loaf of bread, not a whole lot. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son. What are the sticks for? Just to light the fire, to make this meal. And we're going to eat it, and then we're going to die. I'm down to all that I have. This is the last. There is no more. Now remember, what do we know about Elijah? He's someone who likes to be moving. He likes to be doing things. He's a man of action. And he wants to be out in ministry. He wants to be confronting Ahab. He wants to be on the move. And instead, God sends him out to this middle of nowhere region surrounded by people who didn't like him. And he's asking for help from a widow who can't help him. And I don't really, obviously, have any way of knowing what Elijah was thinking at the moment. The Bible doesn't tell us what his thoughts were, but you don't have to be a psychologist to imagine that he was probably asking a lot of tough questions. Wondering things like, why does God have me stuck here, waiting on something to take place? Why doesn't God have me moving forward, doing something, and accomplishing something? And again, this is the kind of thing that you and I, as followers of Jesus, from time to time we are going to deal with. For time to time we're going to face. Sometimes God leads us in ways that don't make any sense to us. And we wonder, why is God putting me on hold here when I know what's out there and what needs to be done? I've got a plan. I know what needs to happen. And God's saying, no. If you've ever been stuck, if you've ever been trapped in a situation like that, there are probably a couple of things going on. Number one, God is not nearly as concerned with my plans as I am because he sees things from a much larger perspective. Number two, if God lets me do my thing my way, then he knows I'm going to be much less likely to depend on him for his strength and his blessing. And so from time to time, God will send a famine or a Jezebel or a Zarephath into our lives because, again, we get focused on our ideas rather than pursuing his will, and we have a habit of doing things our way instead of depending on him. I do it all the time. I think you do too, right? And so when you're in a famine, and Jezebel is against you, and you're stuck in Zarephath, and nothing seems to be working, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because those are in the moments when you will probably be more likely to get on your knees and start praying for God to take over, because if there's one thing that real trouble does, it reminds you that God is the only one who can help. Amen. That's why times of trouble and distress and persecution can actually become a blessing, because it is during times of testing that we remember one truth, which is that surrendering our will to God was the best choice all along. How many of you have read this before in Proverbs 19, verse 21? Many are the plans in the mind of a man. You could add, or a woman. It would apply just as equally. Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of who? The Lord that will stand. The book of Proverbs was actually written before Elijah was born. This was scripture in his day, and he would have been familiar with it, being a godly man. And so he knew those words. He knew they were true. But I have to wonder, because human beings are human beings, even great men of God like Elijah, I have to wonder, even though he knew Proverbs 19:21 was true, if at the same time there were other ideas, competing ideas, running through his mind. Thoughts of what he should be doing rather than sitting in Zarephath and waiting. But whatever he might have been thinking, he made the choice to obey God anyway. Let's go to 1 Kings 17, now verse 13. Here's what Elijah says after the widow has said, I can't really do anything for you. Verse 13, Elijah said to her, do not fear. Go and do as you have said. In other words, go make that bread. But first, now watch this. Make me a little cake of it and bring it to me. And afterward, make something for yourself and your son. What he's doing here, people think he's being selfish. He's inviting her in to his walk of faith. I'm obeying God. I'm inviting you to obey God with me. And what happens? Verse 14, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. And here's, if you'll obey me, he's saying, if you'll obey God's word, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. Now, here's what you have to understand. When Elijah makes that statement, he's got two things to go on. Number one, he's got the memory of what God has done for him in the past. And it's been significant, right? And number two, he's got faith that God will continue to lead him in the future. In other words, God's been faithful in my past. Here's what God is saying to me now, and because of that, I am going to obey. And so he asks this widow to do something that doesn't make sense. Not to her, not to most people watching. And what happens? Verse 15. And she went and did as Elijah said. Now, and she and he and her household ate for many days. And then here's our verse, verse 16. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty. Why? According to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. In terms of how this applies to your life and to mine, let me say something that I need to hear from time to time, and I think probably we all need to hear from time to time. When you're trapped in a situation for which there is no good answer, that's the moment when you find out what it means to trust God. Until that time, it is easy to talk about faith, right? We can all come to church, talk about faith. Praise God, I'm walking in obedience to the Lord, but I don't really have any trouble, and my life is good. Right? Easy to talk then. But when you're trapped in something that's really bad, and there isn't a way out that you can see, that's when you find out what it really means to trust God. And that's one of the reasons God gives us stories like this one here in the scriptures, which talk about his leading and his provision. Why? So that it can build our faith, because times of lack, times of need are coming. They come to all of us, every single one of us. And so think about the spiritual lessons that Elijah's learning here when God's putting him in a bad situation with no good options. Number one, he's in the desert by the stream of water. That's the first part of chapter 17, right? And what's he learning there? He's learning the simple lesson that God can take care of him. In a time of famine, God provides a stream of water, food from ravens. God takes care of him. Here's the second lesson he's learning in Zarephath, in that little town in Sidon. He's learning not only can God take care of him, but God can use him to take care of others. Because he goes and he's obedient, this widow and her family are blessed as a result. But all of this provision and all of this blessing come down to one decision Elijah has to make. He has to be willing to do what God says, even if it doesn't make sense in the moment. And that's where you and I stumble, right? I can know what God is saying, but it is something else completely for me to make that decision to obey when it doesn't make sense to my way of thinking. And if you think about it from a purely human perspective, what God was saying to Elijah didn't make sense at all. Let's go back to verse 9. I keep reading this, but just watch this. Verse 9, arise, go to Zarephath, little tiny town, belongs to Sidon, enemy territory. They're not going to want you there. You're going to be targeted and persecuted. And then dwell there, stay there, live there. You're not coming home anytime soon. And while you're there, I've commanded a widow who has nothing to feed you. There's no way Elijah could have understood what the Lord was saying and why he was saying it, but he still made the decision to obey anyway. Look at verse 10, the first part. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And so in the process of obeying, and we're almost finished, but I want to leave you with just a couple of short thoughts. In the process of obeying, even when it didn't make sense, Elijah was acting on a truth that we all need to remember, and you've heard me say it many, many times here in this church. God sees things we don't see, and he knows things we don't know. Right? Therefore, when he's telling us to do something, even though it doesn't make sense, the best thing we can do is follow wherever he's leading. Very likely you're going to leave this church today, and you're going to do what I do. You're going to forget everything I said this morning. I don't remember my sermons. And most of you are going to, just be honest, right? But if you forget everything I've said, I want you to remember two essential truths. Number one, God always knows exactly what he's doing. Number two, God's plans for your life are always better than your plans for your life. A couple weeks ago, I think it was, we did a teaching on these two verses, and this is the last thing I'm going to read, and then we're going to worship the Lord in communion. But it's in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with what? All of your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding, which talks about things that make sense or don't make sense to you. That's not the measure, is it? Don't lean on your own understanding. Instead, verse 6, in all of your ways, acknowledge him. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. It means basically putting him in first place, acknowledging that he knows things that you don't know. In all your ways, acknowledge him. And what happens? He will make straight your paths. That's the God we serve. A faithful God, a gracious and merciful God who knows what he's doing, and his plans for you are always, always best.